Welcome to the American Marketing Association's Faculty Development Series. The American Marketing Association Pittsburgh chapter is the essential community for marketers in the region. No other organization provides more ways for marketers and academics to connect with the people and resources they need to be successful. Visit us online at www.amapittsburgh.org. We'll get right to today's series session, which is how to run a case competition, tips and techniques for online, on-ground, and co-curricular competitions. So I'm excited to introduce Dr. Jean Ann Nichols and Dr. Kurt Schimmel from Slippery Rock University, who will be leading us through this very impactful faculty development session. So let me turn it over to you, Nan.
All right, thanks, Doreen. Really appreciate it, and thanks everybody for joining us. I am trying to figure out here what I need to do to share my screen. Here we go. Now, can you guys see that?
It is visible, ready to go.
Okay, there we go. So as Doreen said, it's how we were running a case competition. Kurt has been marketing faculty for going on 30 years and has done these many, many times in many, many different capacities. I'm relatively new, and I really have been lucky to have great faculty surrounding me. Kurt and I are married, so I really have great faculty around me. What we did was last fall, I was able to teach our marketing capstone class, and I taught it using the national case competition, so the AMA case competition. So we put together kind of some tips and tricks and some lessons learned on whether you're using this in an online format for an asynchronous class, face-to-face class, or if you're doing the club. And I'll turn it over to Kurt so that he can kind of start with these first couple slides.
Great, thank you. So the first thing is that these are experiential learning opportunities for the students. So this provides them with that hands-on opportunity to do problem solving in a safe way, meaning that they're not in a potential class client's critical path, but they are learning and they are taking advantage of a case that is of interest to a business that has participated with us. And what we need to understand is that this is a case opportunity, and if we're doing it in the club, we need to make sure that we've got upper level leadership as well, students that are seniors as well as juniors, because students that are sophomores and below, freshmen, have not had the marketing courses and don't have the breadth of knowledge needed to really handle it. However, it is a great learning experience for them to see how, from a time management perspective and getting a taste of what's going to come in their lives, for them to participate and learn. One of the things that we like to do is we like to make sure that the size of the teams matches whatever the competitions are. It's easy to format it that way. And we try and do the composition of teams within the skill sets of the students, so that not everybody are perhaps sales oriented or advertising oriented, but a nice mix of the types of students that you have between traditional marketing management, sales, advertising students, that contributes. And you need to be able to prepare the students for ambiguity, because the first instinct, especially these days with the current students, is they really want to have a right answer. And the idea that there isn't or might not be a right answer, there's a good answer, there might be a better answer, but it's not the right answer, becomes a little bit of an issue for them. So having them understand that ahead of time and preparing them that there's going to be ambiguity in the case is very, very important. And you'll have greater satisfaction from the students because they're ready for that. They understand that. And as an instructor, you need to be focusing on and working toward the higher order levels of Bloom's taxonomy. Now, if you're going to be doing it for a course, the upper level capstone for marketing would be the ideal place because you're applying all the materials there. And again, it's appropriate to be applying and solving problems in Bloom's taxonomy at that level. So if you're aligning it from a curricular perspective, you need to be thinking about where you are in Bloom's taxonomy, where you are in your assessment, what the learning goals and objectives are for the program, and what all you're able to attach to and get from the case as you go through it. One of the things, especially in the online, is to provide detailed instructions on how to do the case, how to run a case analysis. We provided that both in written format and recorded to the students. That way the students can watch it on their own. And within the broad perspective and reviewing marketing overall and strategic marketing planning, we recorded and required the students to watch the recordings. And this is an important thing because if you don't require the watching of it, you spend a lot of time. You put it in there, and not all students are going to participate in watching it. But if you require the participation through watching it, then you do get that participation of it. And then one of the other things that we did was we reviewed the case itself. And we make the ties between the case that we're handling and the concepts of the chapters with each of the recordings. And in that way, they're seeing how what they're learning in the text is also being applied in the case itself. So they see that connection between application and the theoretical of the book. Excuse me. Now, one of the things we found incredibly helpful is that you are developing a timeline and teaching the students basic project management. So they have to have a timeline, interim deliverables. The instructor needs to be able to provide feedback at each step. That way, excuse me, if the students are off course, they are able to be brought back in and you're able to give them feedback along the way as far as where they may be making severe mistakes or where their thinking or applications may be inappropriate. Again, this is about a learning process for the student. It's not necessarily about winning the case, but it's about taking the students through the learning objectives for the program and having them apply it correctly. And one of the things that we did was we were able to use these interim deliverables to gauge the student's understanding of the material, as well as that they're making the proper applications of the material. We also required weekly meetings, and even in an asynchronous course, we did require a synchronous meeting, but only one member from each team had to be there. These meetings were recorded and then they were posted in the course as well so that everybody could see it. The attendee was required to take notes and then share those notes with their group. And Nan will address that a little bit later in the discussions as well. And then the way that we did this, it was able to see how the students were applying it, get their feedback live, get their questions back, because in an asynchronous class, not all of the questions, they didn't want to write all of their questions, quite candidly. This is a way to address that and get at those, as well as allow them to hear what professors thought were the important book learning points of the case as we went through it as well. So one of the things that we did was we had the other marketing faculty utilize the cases rubric and judges rubric to evaluate the teams. And this was not done for the students' grades, but it was done for two purposes. It was able to let the faculty see how the students had applied the material, let the faculty see the quality of the work that the students had done, but also because they're teaching the prior courses to it, let them see areas that we may need to or want to improve as well. So this tied into the continuous improvement of our program and the courses in the marketing area as well. So it was a way for all of the marketing faculty to see what the end outcome was and what adjustments we may or may not want to make. And then finally, we did the students had to do presentations using the competitions rubric. And then these were recorded as a presentation online.
Yeah, thanks, Kurt. This is where you can see how I set it up, and this goes week by week. And if you see, like, the weeks I only have really were through week 8. Eight were, very specific. And then the last 2 weeks, 9 and 10, I used it for more general questions. This is when a lot of times students will leave a lot of their work till the very end. But in this case, because it was an online course, it allowed students to have the ability to try to find times that would work for them to either, work together on something or set up a Google Doc or something else. But these weeks, as Kurt was talking about, really went hand in hand with what we were discussing from a chapter perspective. So we started off looking at a case briefing. And at the end, I'll show you that there was a book in particular that I used that really talked more about a case briefing. And then the rest of these were really more from what you would find in a typical strategic marketing planning book, where it really looked at how to do these things, where we would review them. Like Kurt was talking about, we required these weekly meetings that would be a Zoom meeting, but we also had recordings that were more general. So we had a general review and recording of how you use a case, using a case brief, looking at the framework and problem definition, and the rest of these that are on here, background analysis, market research. So when in the process of doing that, our goal was to have the basics that you need, that we could record, that no matter which case you're working on, that you'd actually be able to, we'd actually have a resource that, so Kurt could go to it. For example, this semester, he's using a business marketing class that he's teaching to do the regional case competition. And he's able to call upon, pull up these reviews of what they are, or provide them to the students. Similarly, we also have our AMA chapter at Slippery Rock is also going to be working on the case, and Kurt is leading that effort as well. And again, since we have these general recordings, we can provide those to the students, that we don't have to sit there with them necessarily and walk them through each piece of it. Especially anymore, it's so hard to try to get everybody together that we need to have together. And then, like I said, those last couple of weeks were for general help and, whatever we needed, if we needed additional information. As Kurt has already mentioned, this idea of learning was a process. This was experiential learning. Obviously, if it's in a club, it's more co-curricular, but again, experiential, taking some of the things that students have learned in the different marketing courses and other business courses they've had, and then applying it. Our goal, although Kurt's very competitive and would like to win, my goal has always been, it's a process. And Kurt, also values this with what we're trying to do, is we're trying to help students learn and apply some of the things that they've learned in class. So it's the process of learning as opposed to winning. We were also really lucky that Kurt and I make up 2/5 of the marketing faculty at Slippery Rock, but we really had buy-in from our other 3 marketing colleagues. And as he mentioned, because we had that buy-in, we were also able to take a group. We had 5 groups, and we were able to use those 5 groups and their submissions, and then the faculty evaluate them, and then use the inter-rater reliability to pick which one we actually submitted. Also involving faculty, we were able to learn from what students were ready, willing, and able to do, and how they actually applied what they had learned. And we definitely saw some deficiencies. And because of that, we were able to, as a faculty then, figure out what we need to do and start to work on how do we make sure that students have the knowledge, skills, abilities to take a case and be able to work on it on their own. And of course, then we also relied very heavily on our research librarian, because I think over the last couple of years, with students not going to the library, even just to use casual resources in the library, I think that they also needed to be reminded of how important it is to use the right research tools write research databases. And our research librarian is just really a gem at being able to do those kinds of things. Kurt, do you want to talk about these ones?
Sure. Thank you. Some of the things that we found that students have repeatedly tried to do, and some areas of struggle that we found, especially with the undergraduate students. The problem definition, instead of really defining what the problem is and really understanding what the outcome is needed, they want to define it in a way that fits their preferred skill set. And they try and match their solution to their personal strengths instead of perhaps expanding themselves and utilizing courses that maybe they weren't as not familiar, but they didn't have as much fun with, or they didn't like as much, and or areas that they may not be going into. For instance, if a class is more advertising oriented, or a case is more advertising oriented, and they weren't advertising oriented, and they were going, sales and marketing management, they may still be trying to fix things with their hammer, the one hammer that they have, instead of looking at the full toolbox that we as faculty have tried to provide them with. Another one is within the SWOT analysis, providing a lot of opinion, but not a lot of fact, and teaching them that these need to be fact-based and how to utilize that to help you develop strategy and understand what really the strengths, weaknesses, and opportunities and threats are.
And if I just may, that's exactly where the research librarian really came in, because students would have an opinion, and then I would ask them to validate their opinion, to go out and get, that's a good place to start. It was a hunch, but then they had to go out and validate that. And we wanted them to use resources that would actually provide them with accurate information.
And then tying the tactics that they have to the overall strategy, as well as completely, yes, we've done survey research, we've done some primary research, we've done some secondary research, and then ignoring those results and running off in their own direction for a case completion is a common pitfall that we see, because they have learned these in snippets. I did research, I did this analysis, now I've problem solving, but I'm not going back to that other course and pulling that research in and making the decisions based on the data, and teaching them that the data is the key and where they need to be focusing their efforts. Creating primary research, again, giving the proper time for it, the proper development for an instrument, and understanding what are the appropriate statistics, as well as then being able to use those results. So designing something you can actually utilize for the case's solution, as opposed to just doing a survey and being able to say, yeah, look, we did a survey and that was great. But having it be able to be applied appropriately for the case.
And one of the things here, and I'm not sure if I capture it somewhere else, but I want to say it while I'm thinking about it, is we did have I had each group go through and come up with what their survey questions should be. And then we had them come together and decide which questions should be used on the survey, remembering that, you need to go through IRB, and that you have to, have a survey that's going to be a reasonable length so that you could do something with it, with the information, and that people are going to want to answer it. And then what we did was we used one survey, and they all collected, went out and sent the link to everybody, but then everybody used the same results, and, used the same analysis. We had a small group do the analysis and then share that with everybody else, so that everybody wasn't doing their own survey, and that this way that they were actually using the exact same survey and basically singing from the same songbook.
Thank you. Yeah. And one of the other things that I think it's important, and it's an area for struggle, is the project management capabilities of the students, understanding time, accountability, professional communication. We use peer evaluations within groups, and holding them to true project management practices, especially at an undergraduate level, can lead you into the conflict management world. And early, first week, and in the syllabus, the rules are set on exactly how conflict is going to be handled and what's going to happen and how and what role the faculty member has in this. Because first, it is the student case, and they should be the ones that are primarily resolving that. Dan?
So I talked about things that we had that were due, weekly, that students had to do pretty much every week. They had to do discussions, and I'll cover those. They also had, these meetings that they had to have with us and review videos. But I also had specific case deliverables, and we've all worked with students who wait to the last minute to do anything. And I just knew that that wasn't going to work. Prior to getting my doctorate, I spent probably more than 20 years in project management. And so I'm a project manager, probably as a foundation of everything that I do. So I kind of wanted to back into what it was that I wanted students to be doing. And then that way I could coordinate what we were going to cover over the week so that it coincided with what the deliverable was. So there's really a lot of thought and planning that went into this. I want to say that I probably spent a big chunk of, summer just thinking this through, because that's what I do as a project manager, begin with the end in mind, and then just kind of keep thinking through what it is that needs to be done and by when. And then Kurt was the one that was able to help me say, okay, yeah, you're going to need to do that. So we need to be covering something like this, reviewing this chapter, having this kind of a meeting to talk about these things, having this kind of a discussion to make sure that students are on target. So this was basically the case deliverables, and these were case deliverable 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the way that I have them here. So each week they had basically a piece of the case that they had to deliver. So I'm not going to read them, but it's all of the things that you would expect to see in what the final rubric was looking for, how those students were going to be evaluated, the student groups were going to be evaluated. But I also then tied them to, and it was a group submission. So yes, it was a group grade. Students got better about actually sharing and doing group work as the semester went on. Kurt was talking about time management. That really was part of this too. I mean, our marketing seminar, our seniors, the students were graduating and either going to be graduating in December or we're going to be graduating in May. And it was really important to just really see how, as a manager, what my expectations were, and then for them to kind of work their way into this. So all of those meetings and everything had to kind of come back to, what's the problem definition, and really walking them through everything that they were going to need to do for the case itself, and then, tying it all together and putting a bow on it, basically. There were also things that Kurt had mentioned, which was they had to tell me who was going to attend the meeting. And if somebody didn't show up at the meeting, at the weekly Zoom meeting, then I would start emailing the group to say, nobody is on from your group, who's supposed to be on. And then they would somebody would jump on to the Zoom, or the person who was, supposed to be there would be reminded and they would jump on. And again, that's just part of covering your bases as, a soon to be probably graduate and working. If you're not going to attend, there's some accountability there, and, all of those kinds of things. So I kind of was like pretty firm about them, saying who was going to be doing what. As Kurt mentioned before, there's a summary document of what those meetings were, but also like when they had questions, I wanted them to be talking about the questions and sharing that information with each other, not just randomly asking the librarian questions, but pulling that together. And I wanted to be seeing what those questions were. Again, I said that we had weekly meetings where Kurt would sometimes join me on a Zoom meeting, but I also required them to have some sort of, it could be virtual, a weekly meeting among themselves. And that could be done through a group chat, or it could be done by Zoom, or they could physically get together if they wanted to. But I wanted them to be saying who was going to be doing what and by when. So again, project management, what they were going to be doing. And then of course, the assignments that were related to the final case submission and then their presentation. Kurt, do you want to do this one? and then I'll do the discussion.
Sure. Again, we would have weekly meetings, and we would conduct them uh, either with one member of each group or in the classroom, the entire group present. And that was a required part of it. And it was twofold. Again, as I mentioned before, it's about maintaining the communication between the students and the faculty members and having them understand that there may not be a right answer. There is their answer, and what they're doing is they're crafting their answer and then supporting it. Um, Ideally, they're getting their answer from the data and how they have come up with their solutions, but understanding the whole process of going through that from strategy to tactics and implementation based on data was very important. Now, as we did that, especially in the online format, we were utilizing discussion questions every week where the groups would interact with themselves and Nan would monitor it, and she'd be able to see where they were, what some issues are, and be able to pull people aside as needed and give them some one-on-one attention as necessary. Okay, Nan?
Yeah, the nice thing I would say, and Kurt talked about this in the classroom for this semester, is if there is a challenge that comes up, you can kind of adjust in the middle of the classroom, whereas in an asynchronous kind of an environment, it's a little bit more challenging. Even though I would check discussions on a regular basis, if students weren't posting the information that they were having an offline discussion about, it would be, a day late and $1 short, and I'd find out and I wouldn't be able to make an adjustment. So when I talk about these discussion questions, these would just be questions that I would pose, and they were supposed to, even if they were having an offline discussion, they were supposed to be bringing that information into the online discussion, which I think was a really, it didn't start off the way that I had wanted it to, but it came very valuable after students got some of the feedback on those weekly submissions. So when they had to have a case deliverable, I would provide them with feedback, and I would remind them then, if you would have had this conversation or been asking these questions in the discussion forum, I could have provided you with feedback that you could have incorporated into your deliverable. So I really did give them a lot of latitude because, again, we weren't looking to win. I'm not looking to win. I was looking for them to learn. And when Kurt talked about it being very hands-on, it was really very hands-on in making sure that I was reading, providing them an opportunity to update. If they didn't want to update for more points at that point, then make sure that they knew that they needed to include it in their final solution. So I'm not going to read what all of these questions were. I'd be happy to share them with anybody that would like them. But these were questions that I asked, and they were discussion forum questions that each person had their own group. The way the groups were, I separate the discussion groups that way into small groups, and then they would have these conversations. And like I said, some groups caught on really quickly that if they started having these conversations in a transparent way, that I could kind of watch and listen and eavesdrop on their conversations, and I could help them or point them in a different direction. But for other groups, it took them a little bit longer. So just week 1 and 2, and again, if you went back and looked at the way that we laid out which chapters we were covering, what the Zoom meetings were going to be, they would very much align with what these questions were with the discussions. Or we would be setting them up for some future things. So we might have them start to talk about something. For example, here, primary and secondary research in week 3, even though we might not have done that for another week or 2, it was to try to get them starting to think about what the questions were.
One of the things that I'd like to say is that when Nan says that each group had their own discussion, it literally wound up being, it becomes as if you have many classes of 4 students instead of one class of more than 4 students. And in doing it that way, the group is always interacting with each other. It wasn't as much about the cross-pollination of others. It was more about them learning to interact and have those interpersonal skills within the group and be able to share things in a professional manner and address the deliverables and the discussion questions.
Right. And a lot of these, then, you know, when you're with the timelines and everything, it also, these weekly discussions, I could see who was, you know, kind of logging in later in the week and kind of giving me some insight into, you know, who the social loafers were or whatever. And, you know, I could ask the group, you know, what's going on. And in some cases, you know, people had each other's backs, and I appreciated all of that as well. But again, just coming back here, these were what the discussions were. And again, they related with what they were supposed to be reading, what the case deliverables were looking at. In some of these discussions then, you know, they had to post by Mondays. I had my Zoom meetings with them on Wednesday night. Usually by the Wednesday, Kurt and I could strategize about what else I needed to talk about on the Zoom, or something that in particular that he might want to cover. So there we go, week 8, just talking about going back through, making it more about, okay, you have all of this information, now you need to start tying it all together using, you know, one voice. It should be third person. You know, we had a lot of I, me, my, instead of, you know, looking at what the third persons were. And then, you know, really focused on, you've got all of the information now, and this is where it became a little bit of a challenge, was that they wanted a lot more guidance about what the right answer was. And I really had to push back on them and say, look, you have the information, you have to make a decision as a group. Each of you has to make decisions as a group. And I know Kurt's talked about this. It's almost like analysis paralysis. They are afraid to make a decision and afraid to put it all together. So they have all the pieces and parts, but I think in the classroom, or if you were in a co-curricular environment from a club perspective, you could see that the students were having this, and I was trying to have to intuit some of it. So anyway, we had week 8. We're looking at, you know, what the consistency is and giving them ideas of how they need to be reviewing this information so that they weren't working on it the last minute. Again, week 9, week 10, and we gave our faculty probably the better part of 4 weeks, right, Kurt? Because they were doing this as a favor. So we finished up, and probably 3 or 4 weeks before the case needed to be submitted, so that they could do we wanted them to do a real evaluation as well, to really take their time and read it. So we wanted to give them enough time. We submitted that to our cohort. And then what I did from weeks 10 to the final week was cover those chapters that weren't necessarily related to the case. And I'll show you the chapters from the book, what all of the chapters were, but I used the chapters out of order to coincide with what we were trying to cover. And while we did not necessarily really use a rubric for their final presentation, we provided what that would be, because we would hope that they were going to get chosen to actually have to give a presentation when we meet in Chicago in a couple of weeks. But none of our group wasn't selected, so we didn't have to worry about that. But again, we wanted them to be looking at what would be the rubric. We had them do an evaluation using a similar rubric to the one that would have been used by AMA National for each person to evaluate the other groups. From a presentation perspective. And then we also used a peer review of their group that they spent the semester with. So again, that evaluation took into consideration timely responses and, you know, meaningful contributions and stuff like that. So because it was really not just about evaluating the case and applying marketing, it was a lot of other skills that we thought would be important in a marketing seminar course as students were preparing to go out into the marketing world.
So from a club perspective, it's going to be a little different. Again, you're not grading. However, you are going to need to have weekly meetings, and they're going to need to have additional meetings amongst themselves and perhaps in subgroups for it. You're going to need a commitment from them to participate the entire semester, because if people quit partway through and they haven't done their work, that's a significant dropping of the ball. For the advisors, it's almost like having another class, because you're working with the students that closely. You're still trying to teach them as they're going through it, because it is a co-curricular, and that's the point of the co-curriculars, to make it a lessons learned and an application of things that they're doing, and being able to continually show them what they're learning and why it's important that they're learning it, and how they're getting their time management skills, and handling appropriately within a team missed deadlines and perhaps somebody's lack of motivation along the way. In part, the club advisor becomes kind of the cheerleader to keep things rolling. The account executive or the manager for the club, president, is in charge of helping to motivate and keep people going. We require the students who are traveling to the AMA collegiate conference to have participated in the case studies. We want to make sure that we're addressing various levels of knowledge, skills, and abilities, and tying those to Bloom's taxonomy, even if we're not doing it for a grade or a graded class, because this is something that we can show that we're doing within the major and helping students understand materials. It's great to do the case as a junior, because then they've got some problem solving and learned some of those project management skills, as well as applications of some of their marketing materials prior to going out and getting their internship before they get into their senior year. So thinking about who is on the team again is very important, and it's great to have some leadership that are seniors, but ideally from the club perspective, it's a great way to be preparing people for the career path that they're going to be having, and prior to going out into the internships, so that you don't have some unprofessional behaviors. They've kind of been addressed and corrected if they were going to have them.
So as I mentioned before, I looked at a lot of different books. I knew that this wasn't going to be truly a book kind of a taught course, because I wanted to do it as a case analysis. But I also realized that I needed to go back and in some cases kind of help students remember some of the things that they had learned from their previous marketing courses. And so that's why we did this the way that we did it, was record these chapters that you would see in a regular strategic marketing management book. But because it was a case, I also included a smaller piece of a book that was part of analyzing marketing problems and cases, to help them understand what the difference was between analyzing a case and looking at what the marketing problems were versus writing a typical strategic marketing plan. So, the case is more about a specific kind of a problem, and not looking at the whole, brand or whatever that you're looking at, that you might be looking at in a strategic marketing plan. So these were the chapters that we covered. This is not the order that we covered in them. As I said, we had to kind of go through and think about what should they be working on sooner rather than later, what they need to get started on and have to have some sort of a review. But we did, I did cover them as chapters. And like I said, in doing that, we'll be able to reuse them in other marketing seminar courses, or like Kurt said, in the course that he's teaching now, which is business marketing. The case happens to be a B2B case, so it kind of worked out well for using it in a business marketing class. But we also then have it for clubs for future. So, and that's pretty much, I think, it. Kurt, did you have anything you wanted to add that you thought about? No? Okay, then I think that's it. We'll have Doreen get back on here.
Always takes me a moment to get the video back on, but thank you so much, Kurt and Nan, for joining us today to share your insights about how to run a case competition. And I expect that everyone in attendance and viewing this will come away with a lot of activities that they can incorporate, as well as a general kind of philosophy and strategy for putting this into a situation, whether it's within an on-ground class, whether it's in an online class, or even through a club. So appreciate you taking the time today to share all of this with us.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.